Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast with me, Diane Parker. We're busting through life's challenges, and one of the difficult subjects that we're covering this month is suicide. And I've been joined today here by Victoria Gore. Thank you so much for coming along from Holistic Recovery Services. Would you like to share your journey and share how you've become an expert now in helping people with this very tricky subject?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had suicidal thoughts myself from a very young age, about 12 or 13, and struggled with them for 6 or 7 years, every day thinking about it, making plans, writing suicide notes. It was pretty bad there for a little while. And also now some of my work has been in addiction counseling, and a good couple of years we're in crisis counseling. When I'd get a call, I would get calls for people that are suicidal and needing an evaluation, and to help support them through that time, even if it didn't result in a mental health stay, still finding that support, getting them through that crisis, so they could feel a little better for the day anyway.
Yeah, one of the things that I've come across is that people say that they've generally been in a difficult space, and then they feel happier again, and then they go off and they commit suicide. Is there anything that anybody can do or notice more? Because that's when after these effects we go, what can we have done more, better, or different to have helped somebody that was struggling?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to never put that on yourself, right? If somebody chooses to commit suicide, their pain is unbearable. And so that is their brain feels like that's the option, and their thoughts lead to that. And so it's definitely not blaming yourself, but just being there. So if someone comes to you and they say that they're not feeling great, they're feeling suicidal, or if they've thought about it, just being that listening ear and being open to hearing what they have to say. A lot of times we can say, oh, don't think that way. Like, our first reaction is to kind of shut that down. It feels really uncomfortable. We don't want to hear that people are thinking about that or they're considering it. And so when we say that, we really close that door. We really close the door for them to come to us if they are really thinking about it that night or that day, and maybe that conversation could help them. So definitely being open to that conversation and being open to hearing what's going on, and offering that support.
Yeah, that's exactly the same sort of thing as I share when we're talking about grief. Because, especially with the coaching that I've done up to now, it's kind of like not keeping people stuck in their loop, get them out of it to help them find a way forward. But when I came to do the grief coaching, it's about giving that space to just listen and just give them that safe space to just open up without blaming, shaming, or any judgment, so that they can just say what's in their heart. And that's what you're talking about, isn't it? It's creating that same safe space.
Absolutely. Creating that space for them to share it out loud, so that they can get through those feelings, right? Because really it's a feeling of just despair. It's a feeling of being stuck, right? Being stuck between life doesn't feel good. It's not comfortable. I don't like it. I don't want to be alive, and death and killing, yourself. And so for someone to think about that, they're really stuck. And so having that time where they can talk about what's bothering them can help them move away from completing it or thinking about following through with that and making those plans. So it definitely can help. Yeah. And I think that that's another good point too. asking if you have a friend or family member that has either mentioned it before, or you're kind of concerned, they're maybe withdrawing, they're not kind of seeming themselves, asking, are you feeling suicidal? Do you have any thoughts that you be better off dead, or that life is too much, that you don't want to live anymore? Because bringing it up and asking about it does not increase the chances or likelihood of that person following through with it. Opening that door, of course, will decrease those chances, right? Because then they won't feel alone, they won't feel isolated, they won't feel like they can't talk to anyone. So yeah, ask those questions.
And you'll instantly open up that space for them to do that conversation with you, have it with you. That's a really good tip. Thank you for sharing that. So tell us a little bit then, how did you manage to shift yourself and your state of mind? So should anybody be listening that was thinking that way, what steps did you yourself take?
Well, the one thing that kept me going and kept me away from completing or trying was I had a goal. I had something that I really enjoyed, that I really wanted to experience in my life. And one of them was potentially getting married or having children. Of course, at 13, you think about those things, but also having horses. I mean, horses were my place in my mind where this is beautiful, right? Horses are beautiful, majestic.
I'm with you there.
Yeah. And so, thinking about, well, if I committed suicide, I would never get the chance to have children or get married or have horses. And so, there were many, many years that was the thought that saved it every time, was I want horses one day, or I want kids one day. So yeah, just finding that thing that you don't want to give up, right? That goal or that thing that you are looking forward to in your future, and you decide, I'm not willing to give that up. If I kill myself, not willing to do that.
What exactly had put you in that state? Because that's a very young age, isn't it? 13.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of different risk factors. There's a lot of different things that can push someone towards these thoughts. Childhood trauma, having being isolated, not having support that you feel is helpful, losses. So my mom had left someone that I looked at as a father figure, and I was never able to see him again until way later. But so that loss was another risk, and that's the case for everyone, even in adulthood, where if you have a loss and something major happens in your life, a major life-changing event, right after is very high, is higher risk. And so, if someone's already talked about it before and then something happens, reach out to that friend. They're struggling. And so, opening that door, are you doing okay?
Yeah. And this is where we're coming back to people not understanding the emotion of grief.
Yeah.
Because it's about, you grieve for any loss that you have, whether it's a small one or a big one, which is obvious. Everybody knows about the loss of a person that you love, but you've just spoken there about so many losses. And the feeling of overwhelm can come down, and you just don't know how the heck to unpick it all, especially at 13. That's a very special age anyway, because there's so many other changes going on in your life.
Absolutely.
And then to have that separation as well, that's, oh my goodness. And those sort of things can impact us very much so, Ben, for the rest of our lives, even, into adulthood. Knowing how to deal with grief, really, to me, is such a big eye-opener and key since I've come to do this work. Because, the losses that I don't know if you've caught up with me, but I lost my husband, and then a year later I lost my sister. And that's when I discovered the grief recovery method. And so in that we talk about guilt. Okay. because that is often what's used afterwards. I feel guilty, I could have done something, I should have seen this, that, and the other. So is there anything around that you can sort of elaborate on now to share and hopefully give people some insight?
As far as guilt being a trigger for maybe suicidal thoughts, or kind of
the people that are left behind feeling guilty.
Yeah. Well, I think it's normal for us to think about, like, what could I have done different? Like, our brain is designed to think about how to prevent a situation that is hurtful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. So it's natural for our brain to think through situations and try to come up with a different thing that we could have done to try to change it. But I think that this is a situation where you have to recognize that someone's choice to commit suicide was not influenced by you, right? It was their own internal.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
So that one home to anybody that's listening.
Yeah.
Struggling with this as an issue, because I think it's so key. And it's kind of, especially if you're a parent that's just lost a child to this, and all those feelings of, why didn't you come and talk with me? Why didn't you reach out? What then you start asking yourself, well, why didn't they? So keeping the path of communication and observation open and helping create that space. So people can just open up and talk to you about the way they're feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, when you're able to, locus of control, I'm not sure if that's something that you've heard about or are familiar with, but internal locus of control means that we had control of a situation. That external is where someone else, right? It's in the world, it's someone else's, that they had that control. And so when we can sit and say, I did not have control of this situation. I did not make that choice. There's nothing that I myself could do to change this outcome. We're able to better separate that guilt. We can, because really, when you're grieving, you're looking for answers, right? You want answers. Yeah. And so that's where the guilt starts coming into play, because you're exploring all of these questions that come back to whether you had control. So if you can separate that and really focus on grieving with the loss itself, and not going into this side thought of how could I have changed it, and you just stay with the grief itself, because it's tough being there. We don't like being there. It is uncomfortable. And so we kind of find ways to avoid it a little bit. But if we just sit with it and avoid going into that guilt thinking, or that what if thinking, it definitely helps us get through.
It's certainly, dealing with grief, and understanding it better can really empower people, as opposed to, as you were saying before, shutting conversations down before they're actually able to speak it, because you feel uncomfortable yourself. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like, for me, I was wanting steps to help me recover, because I'm that sort of person. Mm-hmm. I'm sick of being in this space. I don't like it one bit. Get me out of here. How do I do that? But the amount of people, though, that either end up for years and years stuck in this grief that they've been carrying, or if you want to have a conversation with somebody about it, to just listen, because that shutting down part you were talking about earlier, I mean, that is just typical of what people do when they're grieving, full stop. Never mind if they're going to talk about this difficult subject of somebody that's thinking about suicidal thoughts and tendencies. So I think what you've shared with us today is so valuable, and I cannot thank you enough for that. How do people get in touch with you if they want to find out more, Victoria?
Yeah, so my website is holisticrecoveryservices.org. My phone number and email are on that website. I feel like it's a little easier to remember a website name than it is phone numbers and things like that these days. So yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
And so before we close up for today, is there anything else that you think that we would need to share that we haven't done so already?
No, I guess, thinking about the connection with suicidal thoughts and intentions with substance abuse, that's really coming from as a therapist and a recovery coach, just connecting people. A lot of times people are more likely to commit suicide if they're intoxicated, if they have been using or they're drunk. So thinking about that, but also a lot of times people use to escape those thoughts. So it's kind of it's in some ways using helps people deal with those thoughts. I myself went through that where, I went through a time where I was using because I didn't want to think about killing myself anymore. I wanted to shut that part of my thoughts down. And so, and it did get me through. It got me through some really difficult times where, maybe I would have been more likely to follow through if I didn't have that unhealthy, granted it's unhealthy, but that way of coping. But there is that other side of it being more risky. So, thinking about when we are expecting people to stop using their substance or their alcohol, we have to think about, if they're suicidal, what does that mean for them? If we're expecting them to stop using, don't use anymore starting tomorrow, where is that going to leave their mental health? And how is that going to leave them with their suicidal thoughts? Because sometimes that can be more dangerous, right? That can, yeah.
In the grief recovery, we talk about STIRBs, which are short-term energy relieving behaviors, things that we do to make ourselves feel better, as opposed to sitting and deal with the pain. I myself was drinking a lot of red wine when my husband was dying, and then for a few weeks afterwards. And you could easily see how that could have ended up being a bigger issue for me, other than an incident I had that made me wake up instantly to realize what it was I was doing and that it wasn't the answer for me. So it's dealing again with the pain of loss, or what the emotions were that were going on for you at that time. For sure, could have easily, if somebody, perhaps a coach or a counselor, would have been around you at the time to have taught you about that. Do you think it might have helped a little bit?
Well, I did see a therapist, and granted, they help in some ways. They definitely don't cure things, right? That's definitely not how it works. But I think the important thing about having a therapist, counselor, coach, anyone that you connect with and you reach out to for help, that the relationship between you and that therapist or counselor is the most important thing. So if you don't feel like they are helping you, or you don't have that connection with that therapist, be open-minded to talking to a different one, because people are all different. Therapists are all different. And so, but that connection is really important. And that can make the biggest difference, is when you have that connection with your therapist, you're willing to open up, you're willing to talk about those things. And you're also willing to take in their advice or their help and the things that they're trying to support you with, and that you're open to listening to that too. So yeah, it's definitely helpful. As a therapist, of course, I'm not going to say it's not helpful. Don't ever do it. But it is very important to have that relationship and find the therapist that's going to work for you.
Yeah. And I mean, if there's parents listening to this as well that are worrying about their children of that age, it's understanding too that some children don't understand the emotions and the feelings and the words to put them into place, either at that age, to be mindful of that. They may act like they're little adults or whatever, but they haven't got the context of what they're saying often behind them to try and get that message through. And I think definitely a professional therapist is key, because they have the tools and skills to open up that door, basically, don't they? Through art therapy, or I mean, we used to take kids from school that had been chucked out of school for these reasons, because they just didn't know how to handle their emotions. And so we would just have, go fishing with them and get them into a nice little relaxed state. And then they would open up and tell you what was going on for them.
Absolutely.
And so if anybody is listening to this that's worrying, then please do reach out to somebody like Victoria, or find yourself your local therapist. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. And if anybody would like to get in touch with me, I'm Diane at resultscoaching.iom.com or lifeafterloss.iom.com. And I look forward to being with you all again very soon. Thanks again, Victoria.
Thanks.